Wait a minute. What kind of a documentary is this? What kind of documentary starts off with a bag of old garbage? What does a bag of garbage have to do with Bigfoot? What happened when Encounters USA's quest for Bigfoot and Russian Bigfoot researcher Igor Burtsev? Well, as with any story, it's necessary to start at the beginning. In Medellin Falls in Washington State. That was where I first met Igor Burtsev while I was conducting interviews of prominent Bigfoot researchers. As it turned out, I met a number of wonderful and interesting people in addition to Igor Burtsev. One of those people was Kelly Rainbow Butterfly and her husband Christian. Anyone familiar with my documentary, Medellin Falls Bigfoot Festival Press Pass, knows my original plan had been to attend the festival, conduct interviews, and then afterwards accompany a Bigfoot documentary expedition and document the filming of the documentary for my Encounters USA podcast. Anyone familiar with the documentary Medellin Falls Bigfoot Festival Press Pass also understands the circumstances and unfolding of events that led me to the home of Kelly Ann Butterfly and her husband Christian before leaving to conduct my own Bigfoot investigation. As you're about to see, two seemingly unrelated events: an interview with Russian Bigfoot researcher Igor Burtsev and a chance encounter with Kelly Rainbow Butterfly of Colville, Washington, would lead to one of the most bizarre Bigfoot hunting expeditions in history. Welcome to Encounters USA's Cascade Bigfoot Blood Mystery. The 110-degree Cascade Mountain sun was already high in the sky by the time I had the Encounters USA or paranormal pickup packed up and ready for the jump over the mountains to the town of Colville, Washington. Upon hearing of my intention of heading through Colville to check out Bigfoot activity north of her, near the Canadian border, Kelly Rainbow Butterfly had suggested the day before I stop by for a lunch with her and Christian before heading out into the wilds. Never one to pass up a free meal, I quickly accepted. Prior to the meal, I was given a tour of Kelly and Christian's museum. I noticed a lot of Bigfoot memorabilia.
From a Sasquatch/ancient one that calls himself Odin, that lived north of us in British Columbia. And this hair was actually gifted to a friend of mine.
Along with a number of pyramids, crystals, plates, and none other than Mr. Igor Burtsev, who I had just interviewed 2 days ago. Once I got over the shock of seeing Igor again, I explained what I was doing there. The conversation went something like this: Igor, I'm going to investigate some Bigfoot sightings. Do you want to come with me? Where are you going? I don't know. When are you coming back? I don't know. Wait, let me get my backpack. And so, while I ate a hearty lunch with Kelly Ann Butterfly and her husband Christian, Igor packed up his things. Ready for you? And it wasn't long before we were heading north toward the Canadian border. Like Igor, I had met John the week before at the Medellin Falls Bigfoot Festival. He'd been hanging around with Todd Neese, so I knew John had to be the real deal. John explained to me in great detail both about the Bigfoot activity as well as the Bigfoot evidence he possessed. I had been sufficiently impressed and had made contact with John a number one priority. First, however, it was time to set up our base camp. We selected a secluded mountain lake that appeared to be in the epicenter of Bigfoot activity in the area, according to Bigfoot researcher Will Ulmer. Will had been good enough to provide me with a map. It was clear from the map that John's location, which we planned to scout the next day, was right in the middle of Bigfoot country. It's always a policy of Encounters USA to respect the areas and the people who live in the locations where our investigations take place, and we do that by keeping the locations secret. Our trip to see our friend John was no exception. So, too, was our campsite next to the lake, which made it imperative for me to get our equipment set up, eat, and get ready for the night's research activities that I used to clean up the blood in my tent. This is great. In order to speed things up as setting up the camp, I put a little extra coffee in the French press. With nightfall falling fast and the sun beginning to set, I wanted to make some Bigfoot calls from the camp. Once I ran through the spectrum of calls on our Bigfoot Calls app from the side of the lake, the plan was to use the FLIR 1 thermal imaging device to see if anything had come down to the lake to check out the Bigfoot calls. Here comes Igor Burtsev. I don't. Ooh. Yeah, and if he comes over and tells me he's not going on the boat, yeah. It's a long walk back to Colville. Are we ready to go? All right, you made it. Ready to go then, I guess. We got the boat all decked out, and off we go. So it was time to get on the paddle ski. A specially designed, air-filled pontoon boat, perfect for getting Igor and I around on the shallow, reed-filled lake. It didn't take much convincing to get Igor on the boat, and we would soon find out why.
And I was even champion of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, well,
rowing.
And what are you now? Row, Igor.
Hello.
Row.
Just for pleasure.
Row.
We try this.
Row.
But I remember that
using Igor's world-class rowing experience, we were able to maneuver around the south and southeast sides of the small lake, training our thermal imaging software onto the shore. What we were soon to discover was that the ambient temperature near the shore was roughly equal to body temperature, which made it very hard to distinguish any potential Bigfoot by body temperature alone. So, Igor, can you see the red?
yes.
So that's warm. So if Bigfoot is back there, he's going to show up red.
This is warm?
Yeah.
Red.
Yep.
Yes.
Or no, I'm sorry, the red is cool. And then the yellow is hot.
They don't move.
We tried a couple of different settings, but found that no matter the color, the difference in stationary objects was not going to be noticeable against the background. After a few more scans with the FLIR, we decided to call it quits. The sun was setting and Igor was eager to get back to shore. And so, that night, as the glow of the moon replaced the intense sunlight, I prepared the camp for the final investigation of the evening. Using electric chem lights and a bright indoor head and foot lamps, we illuminated the large tent structure so that the tent shone bright in multicolors. The intent, no pun intended, was to use the tent to create a colorful, well-lit scene visible to any curious critters brought in by the sounds of the Bigfoot calls. As the sun went down completely, so too did Igor Burtsev make his way into the comfort of the Habitat 6 and the luxury of a queen-sized air mattress, which he would be sharing with me later on. With just the outside illumination on the tent, it was time for the last research project of the night. The lake shore was about 30 to 40 yards in a straight line from the front of the tent. Using Igor as bait, I positioned myself at the lake shore where I could see both the lake as well as the campground. I had my FLIR at the ready, just in case any activity warranted the use of thermal vision. However, the temperature had dropped very little since sunset, and the length of time it would take to get the FLIR set up and going, coupled with the problem of distinguishing the image in the darkness, made me opt for a longer exposure time if I needed an image of the camp in the dark. On the lakeshore, where the moon was just setting below the horizon, I was watching the stars appear more and more distinctly with each passing moment of the setting moon. The temperature had begun to drop, and my tank top and shorts were beginning to feel less than adequate when I noticed the first craft. It appeared in the sky to my right, or in the direction of the camp. I watched in wonder and amazement as the craft crossed the starlit sky above me. Just as it had appeared suddenly a few brief seconds before, it suddenly disappeared out of sight. I would have been left disappointed had another UFO exactly like the first not appeared in the very same spot as the first had appeared. My eyes darted back to watch what looked like the same UFO follow the same trajectory as the first, and then, just like the first UFO, the second UFO also disappeared in the same spot. Instinctively, my eyes followed my peripheral vision back to the origin of the first and second UFOs, and sure enough, a third appeared in the same spot, matching the same description as the ones before. As the third UFO appeared and disappeared, so did a fourth and a fifth, and so on. Once it became apparent the process might repeat itself indefinitely, I called out for Igor to come and witness the spectacle. As soon as I did, the last UFO disappeared from sight. I waited about 15 minutes, but nothing happened. So this is going to be a little bit gross, but for the sake of science, we need to find that paper towel, and we need to find out what is on it. In spite of the heat, UFOs, and having Igor Burtsev sleeping next to me on a queen-sized air mattress that took up most of the floor of the sizable tent, I slept rather well that night, my fifth since leaving Seattle. It was probably just after 6 when I awoke the next morning. I got up and rolled out of the tent, facing into an already warming sun rising in the eastern sky beyond the lake. I knew it was going to be a scorcher, so the best thing to do was to get breakfast ready so that when Igor woke up, we could eat and be on the road to visit John and check out his Bigfoot activity. And there he is, everybody, the world famous Igor Burtsev. Igor, how was your night?
Oh.
Did you sleep?
Difficult.
Difficult? What was difficult?
Yes, it is difficult.
Wow, I didn't know that. I slept like a baby. Oh no. Well, are you tired? You can... One thing I hadn't taken into account was Igor Burtsev's curiosity about my equipment and my gear. The thing that amazed Igor the most, I think, was the DJI gimbal I was using, which has the ability to track the subject of a photo or a video. Last night, after talking to Igor Burtsev, after talking to John, both of whom accompanied me on the trip, both of whom claimed to have nothing
Looking at me.
Yep, it's tracking on you. So just walk around and you can talk. See, it's following you now.
Oh, yeah.
Although it took a few minutes out of our schedule to demonstrate the capabilities of the gimbal, I wanted Igor to have as much interesting video to take back to Russia with him as possible. Oh, this is my friend Igor. He's had a kind of a rough night, but he's made it through. And now we're getting ready to go find John, bring him back, and look for Mr. Sasquatch again. Are you happy?
I'm happy here, yes. I like to be in the forest and the nature. Yes, this is very nice. I love this.
And what about camping with Matt Heines? Is that good?
met?
With me.
Oh, with you? Yes.
Maybe
you are very experienced in such things like cooking and keeping some dishes, etc. Oh, I was admired.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, he hasn't got the bill yet, so we'll see if he's still happy when I send him the bill. So, all right. Well, thanks, Igor, and we're going to head down the road and find John and do some squatching. Once Igor had documented the gimbal in action, it was time to hop in the paranormal pickup and head out to see our friend John. It was a beautiful morning as we traveled down the old forest road to reach the main road that would lead us to John's. I explained to Igor that the paranormal pickup does not have air conditioning and explained to him if he wanted AC, he had to act like an American and put his arm out the window. It took us almost an hour traveling through one mountain valley and then another before we reached our destination. Great to meet you.
Good to meet you.
All right, well.
Igor, good to meet you, sir.
Thank you.
So how'd you guys do last night?
Well, I wanted to talk to you about that, John. We went out to the lake. We got the boat out, the inflatable, and we paddled around. We did use the FLIR, used the infrared, and got good shots of everything. We did call blasting, and there was no. There were noises that really sounded very low rumbles, but I would never say, because there's so much bird life and there's a lot of loons up there and they're all making all different kinds of noises, so I don't want to say anything that was out of the ordinary, because I don't know what's ordinary for up there. But so I would say that we went looking and we didn't see any Bigfoot activity. We did the call blasting past dark and didn't see anything. However, I went out, I was sitting on the edge of the lake, and right when I just basically sat down and I'm just looking at the sky, and you've got the moon on this side, and then right above me I see one very fast moving object, and everything else is just kind of faded stars because of the bright moonlight. Fast moving object lights up to 3 triangles, right? And then keeps going. It dims back down and disappears. And I'm like, wow, that was like a UFO. And as I'm watching, the same thing again. Another one comes, same bright light, 3 prongs, and dims, disappears. And it was like, as that one disappeared, then another one would show up. And I'm going, am I looking at the same UFO going back and forth again? Because it would just go a certain part of the sky and it would illuminate, and then it would just disappear. And then as soon as it just disappeared, the next one comes. So I'd say about 10 of them. And I was going, this is going to happen, this is going to last all night. So I said, Igor, come out here. And then it stopped. So, but
no video of it or anything?
No video. I haven't had very many UFO encounters, but there's no mistaking that.
How were they in the stratosphere, in space, or were they in the atmosphere?
They were in the atmosphere. No, they weren't way up. No, they were in the atmosphere.
In white light?
Yeah, white. So
and then with 3 white prongs
they
or whatever?
They looked almost like pyramidal. They were almost like little triangles,
Wow.
And I could draw them. But it was like,
wow,
those aren't man-made. So, and it really looked like they were just kind of coming into where we could see them, and then made it to a certain point and then out.
In early morning, like 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning, I'm standing out here, and I see this awning was not out. I see a white light in behind these trees over here, and it looked to me as if it was moving. It wasn't the moon, And I got down over here, and then this security light comes on, and I just went back and went to bed. Next day, Lois and I go down the trail, and there's a big old broken branch from that tree right over there, 40 feet off the ground. Busted off, and you can tell it's a bottom branch too. And on these trees, that's protected,
when you speak about this UFO, I'm not much skilled in this knowledge about UFO connection with our creatures like this Sasquatch, Bigfoot, and our forest wild people. Yes, but there were two cases of connected. When I came into the South Carolina home of Robin McCrae, we were moving by car with Janice Carter. Janice Carter, I know her since 2004. I visited her property and I had found a lot of signs of the existing there. The family of Sasquatch or Bigfoot, headed by their what is father of the clan Fox. And even I had footprints, made casts of footprints there in their property. And Janice Carter was driving, we were running with her from Tennessee, this in 2018, from Tennessee to South Carolina to look for Robin's property. We were moving for along there, could not find because though Robin has a city address, yes, road so and number so, but we were looking for it 2 hours maybe. Since 8:30 late p.m. more than even more late. When we come to ask in a gas station about her address, they showed me. We went once, we could not find another one. We just reached the property of Robin McCrae 12:30 in the night. And Robin was sitting in the yard, in front of their house. She's getting up out of the car and saying, I was sitting here for some half an hour. And I saw one UFO was coming over that trees, over that forest, maybe 1 mile away. They were landing. And my friend Bigfoot told me, mind speaking, that be careful, go inside of the house because there's coming some aliens or some like so, maybe they harm you. But she said, I'm waiting for my friend. I cannot go inside of the house. I'm waiting for theirs, just have to come. In this case, their friends answered them, okay, we shall care about you. We shall care about you. That means there is some connection between them, but think that they are connected directly. Okay. It is something, maybe they are opposite them, maybe they are just cooperating sometime with them, but there is some connection. Okay. This was one.
Right over here.
Yeah. You had footprints here, footprints, yes.
Right.
And but haven't you seen themselves or not?
I have not seen them.
Yeah.
I have photographs from our encounter in 2015 out at Trout Lake also that are pretty convincing, especially when you get the handprint and then a big arm print. You can see the fur and everything, you know. So.
Yeah. Do you live here without a dog and no matter?
I have a pit bull inside and a wife. I got a pit bull. I got a pit bull and a dog inside. No. My wife, she's not a dog. She's the pit bull. She's real calm though. The dog is and everything. We had it slap our trailer just 3-4 days ago. Wow. It was like the night before Todd was coming out. And like I said, I come out here and I'll stand on this porch and I'll just think loud thoughts in the complete darkness, you know. And every night it's different due to the moon and the clouds and these trees. It's all pretty, and it's the old cedars, you know. I'll take you down there and down by the creek and everything. There's some old growth down there, you know. And then there's across the street, and this 10 acres runs the length of the creek. Everybody else, because this was deeded in '52. Some gold miners, I think, lived here first. And then they took, once they decided they could get more waterfront property if they went across the creek with the 10 acres instead of along the creek, So that's what's unique about this place. And then them next door, they've been there 30 years.
So your methodology is you do meditation and you try to communicate with them in a spiritual fashion?
Yeah, I think loud thoughts. I mean, I'll ask them to show themselves, They know they don't. And again, this place was trashed, bro. We cleaned it up. And I feel an appreciation. Last summer, mostly, it was very emotional. My dad died a couple of years ago. I believe that the footprints that she did leave, she left on purpose as a sign of acceptance. To tell you the truth. I mean, the very first fire my wife and I had over here in that little fire pit, as soon as we were going to go, my neighbor comes over and says, there's a cougar been seen around here and it's getting dark, So he's being, good neighbor. But as soon as I put the water to the fire, I mean, you could hear the rock hit the rocks on the bottom of the creek before the splash. That's how big it was, you know what I mean? And we're like, wow, that was pretty cool. And then last summer we had a big old tree knock, middle of the morning, 10:30 in the morning. And we were just sitting here like we do here, but over there on the bank, and there's some of those trees over there.
Lots of mold. Holy cow.
Now look at.
Okay.
I believe those are two baby squatch prints right next to her left foot.
Oh, look at that.
You know how you carry a baby around and set it down and it holds onto your leg?
Yep. Look at that.
And so that was just on the other side of this trailer over here. And so we've had the rocks thrown in the creek, tree knocks.
Did you measure this?
Yeah, it was over 16.
14. Yeah, it was 14.
I had a picture, it's still on my camera. I didn't print it out, but if my buddy put his foot next to it, his foot was a size 11 and it only went to like right about there.
Jeez.
I stuck my fingers in there and you could feel the toe impressions. And I really wish I had my wits about me and I would have, because I could have cleared this cobble out of here that'd fallen in there, when he pulled his foot back out. And I probably would have got a very good set of toe prints out of a cast.
After seeing John's evidence and hearing about the activity on his property, I have to admit, I was not really convinced there was a lot up here to see, but that was before we had a chance to look at his property.
So this is very, very old area. And we were down here, cleaned all the bottles out of that pit one day, went back to Kennewick for a day, came back another day later, and this was broken.
There are signs of them here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there.
Yeah. That was one of the first ones they left us.
So this side has no sticks and limbs or more sticks and limbs?
What do you see? Zero, right?
Yeah, looks pretty bare.
And then notice how fresh the stump. Shoot that stump over there to your left. See it up there?
What is that stump?
We found pinch marks where they peeled like grubs. Like that piece of bark is laying out here in like 10 feet from the tree. And there was a footprint in that sawdust last summer.
We'll have to check that out. Here?
Yeah, the footprint was right here.
Wow.
It was right down in here. It's all filled in now. But they pulled this bark off. And I think there's grubs or ants in there. See how fresh it is? And there's no claw marks like a bear.
When it happened?
Last summer.
Last summer, right?
Yeah.
And he broke.
Oh, see this lane right here?
Yeah.
It was pulled off and thrown down here, you know? That's a big thing down there. It's a 600-pound pig in there that disappeared behind you. Wow. So like I said, I believe they come up to the road. It's 30 feet to the road there, drops down, and it's nothing but impenetrable bush through here to the other mountain. This one's on the property line. There's across the street on the property line. There's a broken tree, just snapped in half. Between Mike and Lisa, there's one of those trees that it's like a big 80-foot tree that's been bent over into an arch. I mean, that could have been done by snow, but it just happens to be on the property line.
They compose an arch, you know?
Pig pen for a 600-pound domestic pig they had as a pet. And one morning, they were here a few years, and I talked with the previous landowner. We know him, and she said that one morning the pig was gone. No blood, no gate wasn't open or nothing. Just gone.
No blood, no any signs of
A struggle.
killing it.
Yeah.
Just
Those are the only branches that are broken. You know, like somebody stands there. So I think they come out and they, monitor the evening.
how we call it?
Garter snake.
People used to wear them as garters.
I've never seen trees grow that big, or that fast. But behind these trees, and see, I'll see a lot of stuff like this where something big looks like it stepped on this. But this end is broken back this way and woven between these trees. You see what I'm saying? That's not natural.
Вот это дерево свалено, а его вершинка заломана и повернута вот сюда. Вот здесь завернуто, видишь?
Well, all right. Well, let's talk about what are our options. So, we're staying out at Met, and I noticed that there's a lot of traffic going around the lake, and I haven't really looked at the map, but are there places that we can go to where we could just kind of stay in the area? Or do you want, how far is the place that you're talking about?
Well, that was just to see the trees. That's not real. Okay, this is a pass road, and this is where those cuts are. So we could go up there and we could glass that during the night. We'd probably want to go up there this afternoon and find a spot. So we, because we're not going to find it in the dark.
Well, why don't we just go now?
So we can do that.
We soon decided, however, that we were not going to go up to that valley to scope out the Bigfoot activity. Instead, Igor was getting rather hot, and we agreed it was time to go back to the lake and conduct our Bigfoot research there. John decided he would also accompany us and help us out with our Bigfoot research. So together we headed out and made our way first to get some supplies and then back to our base camp. So as I'm putting my stuff away, I have... By the time we arrived back at the base camp with John, the sun was already setting to the west. The secluded lake turned out to be a popular fishing destination with the locals who were eager to tell about their lives in small-town Washington state.
I went to Ione and met this gal. We had 2 boys, and she left me for another man.
Oh, geez.
I was like, well,
What you said about Bigfoot?
what the hell? Huh?
What about Bigfoot you said, Sonny? Not?
As usual, I didn't want to waste time. The night before, we had made Bigfoot calls from the camp. Although we'd seen some interesting UFO activity, the Bigfoot Sounds app played over my Pathfinder 2 loudspeaker hadn't brought in any noticeable Bigfoot activity. While John was planning on fishing, and Igor had the cool waters of the lake in mind, it was time to check my equipment. I was going to be making calls on the Bigfoot Sounds app from the opposite shore of the lake. In order to test the equipment, as well as try to generate interest in the lake, I wanted to make calls from every direction, starting with the western side, which was closest to our base camp. Then, I planned to work my way around the lake. By the time I was finished, the surrounding mountains and hills would be echoing with the sounds of Bigfoot whoops and howls. While I was crossing the lake, call blasting, and looking for signs of activity, I was met by a father duck who assured me I was not welcome. I, in turn, reassured him, as well as I could, that his nearby family of a mother and a few ducklings was perfectly safe as I rode the paddle ski away from their route of travel. I first took shots of the South Lake shore, which was full of impenetrable thickets. I made a few scans with the FLIR to see if there was any noticeable changes in the temperature. As Igor and I had found out the night before, the ambient temperature was still around 100 degrees Fahrenheit, close to the body temperature of Homo sapiens and larger mammals. Moving to the eastern side of the lake, which was still receiving direct sunlight from the setting sun, the temperature was still up above 100 degrees. It didn't look as if the FLIR was going to be much help sighting anomalous activity that might be watching from the shore. As I closed in on the eastern shore of the lake, some time and a few Bigfoot call blasts later, I spotted what looked like a small sitting bench next to a hiking trail. Without the ability to penetrate the dense lakeside vegetation with my FLIR until the temperature dropped, I planned on penetrating the dense vegetation the old-fashioned way. I would make some more Bigfoot calls, land the boat, and go inland, boots on the ground style. However, there was an eerie quiet in the forest as I hiked in to a reasonable vantage point. I wanted to get some footage with my older Sony Handycam's infrared. Although it wasn't the best image compared to what is available today, the infrared on the Sony Handycam would definitely show a difference in body temperature if there was one to be found. In both the FLIR and the infrared mode, the results were exactly the same. The sun was disappearing to the west, and the forest in which I stood was also home to wildlife like bears and mountain lions, either one of which might have become curious at my Bigfoot sounds. I returned to the boat and slowly began skirting the shore, call blasting as I went. Realistically, I knew the Bigfoot Sounds app I was playing on my loudspeaker sounded more like a human trying to do a Bigfoot call, and that didn't really bother me. I had heard from Bigfoot researcher Ron Moorhead and others that recordings of Ron's Sierra sounds or other Bigfoot recordings actually invoked a violent primate-like territorial response when they were played in the mountains and woods. I certainly didn't want to appear threatening in any way and bring the wrath of a territorial Bigfoot down on our camp that night. And so I skirted the lake, blasting Bigfoot sounds interspersed with the sounds of Shambhala by Three Dog Night, the Cowboy Song by Thin Lizzy, and even threw in some Motley Crue as I made my way to the southeast shore, completing my circle. The light of the sun had been replaced by the glow of a full moon that rose over the tops of the mountain ridges to our south. The cool water of the lake lowered the temperature of the surrounding forest enough. I hoped to make anything warm-blooded standing in the darkness appear on the FLIR and the Sony Handycam infrared. I took my final readings, hoping to see something standing in the trees just back from the lake, looking at me in curiosity. Rowing across the lake to the base camp in the moonlight was a wonderful experience until I paddled into my camp and found I was nowhere near my campsite. When I backtracked and saw how easy it was to spot our base camp and hear the sounds of John and Igor talking, I could not help but wonder if I had even passed the camp to begin with.
Oh, no, I'm good. No.
Once the equipment was secured, John advised me that Igor had already turned in, so I suggested we take our chairs down to the lake and watch in silence for a while to see if anything of interest showed up. Sure enough, it wasn't 5 minutes before the UFOs from the night before returned. And it couldn't have been better timed, as I had been pointing out the location where the UFOs had appeared and disappeared the night before, just a few minutes earlier. Of course, John had been skeptical. He was wondering if there had just been a reflection of sunlight off an aircraft in the atmosphere. When he saw the first craft and heard me shout, "Look, they came back!" I think John was a little more than convinced. Unlike the night before, the duration of the UFO appearance was limited to 4 or 5, and then suddenly the show ceased. And so, John and I sat in the moonlight, each situated to cover an area of sight to include the lake in my case and the camp in John's. The next few minutes were uneventful, and the hour was getting late. As much as I wanted to continue to conduct research and check out the area, the call of the air mattress in my habitat tent was too much of a temptation. I said goodnight to John as he passed by in the darkness. With the help of my headlamp to light my way, I unzipped my tent's door and soon was resting peacefully in the soft comfort of my air mattress. Somewhere in the darkness, on the other side of the air mattress, lay Igor Burtsev. I thought about Igor's advanced age and how the heat was taking its toll. In the morning, I thought we would pack up everything. I would drop off Igor at Kelly and Christian's, and I would make my way back to Seattle. I listened momentarily for the sounds of Igor's breathing, and satisfied he was, I soon dozed off to sleep. The transition from the cool of the starlit night to a tent lit up by the first rays of another hot summer sunlight was enough to wake me up at just a little bit after 6 a.m. I unzipped my way out of the tent and walked around the side toward the camp table where John sat smoking a cigarette, drinking a cup of coffee. He explained he didn't bring an air mattress, and the hard ground and rocks hadn't done his back any favors. He was packing up. That sounded like a good enough plan to me. As Igor rolled out of the tent, we told him about our plan, and it appeared to sound good to him as well. So less than an hour later, John said his goodbyes and headed back to his wife and his pit bull. I told Igor the faster we packed up the camp, the faster he could be eating a real breakfast in the luxury of Kellyanne Butterfly's home in Colville, which was just a few hours away. Igor Burtsev, how are you this morning?
I feel nice. My feeling is nice. And we had spent here 2 nights. It was a good experience.
Ready to go home? Ready to go back to Colville?
To Colville, yes.
Or you want to stay here?
I'm ready for that.
We can stay 5 more days, no problem.
No problem.
You're the...
Yes.
Okay.
I like such conditions and experience, adventures.
Good.
It's called adventures.
Good. Well, we'll say do svidaniya to you, but thank you for coming, Igor. And it's going to be a great documentary because of you. So thank you.
I hope so. I feel and I say you good luck.
Thank you.
For that.
How do you say good luck in Russian?
Good luck. Удачи. Удачи.
Okay, everybody out there. Удачи.
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 Удачи тебе.
Okay,
Удачи.
there you go. After 6 days in the scorching heat of eastern Washington, I could not wait to get home and take a shower. In fact, the last bath I had was swimming in the fish pond at the Box Canyon Dam near Medellin Falls. It was this mindset that I had to get packed up and heading home that led me to what could have been the biggest mistake of my or anyone's Bigfoot hunting career. With Igor behind me to help pull things out of the tent, I unzipped, then entered our large tent and went directly to the air mattress. I pulled out the valve stem, and as the air was gushing out of the large crevice, I sat down on what had been my side of the mattress. I looked down at the floor of the tent, and that's when I saw it. What was sitting on the floor of the tent was unmistakable. It was a pool of blood about 6 inches by 4 inches wide. In other words, it was not a circle of blood. It was more rectangular or square, and it was thick and gooey and fresh. It was almost like syrup. Igor had been standing outside the tent, waiting for me to pass him something to take to the truck. All he heard me say was, "Igor, who put this blood in the tent? Is this from you?" I can, to this day, still not explain my reaction to seeing a pool of blood on the floor of my tent the morning I planned on leaving the mountains of eastern Washington for Seattle. In the absence of an explanation from Igor, and with no input whatsoever, except for denying he had anything to do with it, I could think of doing nothing other than what I was in the tent for in the first place. I showed the pool of blood to Igor briefly and then stood and left the tent, while Igor stayed inside. Before I continue, I would like to point out to all who are watching this video about what happened. First, there will be those who will question whether or not it happened at all. For those that question whether it happened at all, that is one distinct possibility. If you were not present to witness it, since I was there to witness it myself and know that there was a pool of mysterious blood in my tent the morning we left that lake in eastern Washington, I know there are 3 possibilities. Possibility 1, Igor Burtsev put the blood in the tent. If Igor Burtsev put the blood in the tent, he would have done it before he got out of the tent that morning. It was at least an hour before Igor and I went back in the tent to pack. During that whole time, the tent had been zipped and closed. During that time, considering the heat inside the tent, the blood would not have looked as if someone had just put it there. Possibility 2, John put the blood in the tent. John was never near the front of the tent that morning. Even if John were able to slip into the tent, the same conditions would apply. The blood would not have appeared as if it were just put there. Finally, as John pointed out, why would he put his own blood there when it would be tested anyway? Possibility 3, I am lying. I would accept that myself as the most likely possibility if someone were to tell me the same story and I didn't know the credibility of the person telling the story or believe the other 2 possibilities to be correct. Let's face it, blood does not just appear on the floor of a tent. If the above possibilities are not correct, there is only one possibility left to consider. Somebody or something left that blood on the floor of the tent. If that is true, somebody or something was able to unzip the door of the tent, which is not easy to do in the most ideal circumstances. They were then able to go inside and either bleed or leave a pool of blood on the floor and then exit the tent, zipping up the door without being noticed by 3 individuals not 20 feet away. Now that we have examined the possibilities, what about the reaction of Igor and I to the blood? With few exceptions, many will suggest the myriad of things I could have done differently. And so, in order to silence those critics, let's hop into the woulda, coulda, shoulda machine and see some of the options available, so that you, the viewer, don't feel obligated to point out what I coulda, woulda, and shoulda done to me in person, on social media, or in late-night talk show interviews. My first option was to collect the blood and store it in something. Answer: I was looking more for actual Bigfoot or evidence of Bigfoot. I didn't exactly bring along a blood testing lab. My second option: take a picture of the blood. Answer: it never once crossed my mind to take a picture of the blood. I find this highly unusual since the question of whose blood is it anyway was the paramount question on my mind. My third option, have Igor take a picture of the blood. Answer, I don't know if Igor took a picture of the blood. My fourth option, any of the above or any combination of the above. So now you are aware that I am aware of the proper action to take under such bizarre circumstances. So here's exactly what I did. Confused, tired, and somewhat disgusted at the sight of a pool of blood on the floor of my tent, I went to where I kept all of the cleaning supplies and grabbed a roll of paper towels. I promptly returned to the tent and sat down on the deflated air mattress. With no hesitation, I began to wipe up the pool of messy, gooey blood from the floor of my tent. I do not recall how many paper towels I used to clean up the blood, but considering the size of the pool, I would have to say at least 2. And then I took the paper towels with blood on them from I don't know where, and I threw them in the trash. Once the camp was clean, I took the trash and threw it in the back of the paranormal pickup. After taking some parting photos, we left our base camp. And is that where the story ends? Unfortunately, that's where the high strangeness begins, with an almost deadly encounter. Igor and I had made the journey along the Forest Service road, kicking up dust as we went. We reached the intersection with the main road where I stopped to get one last video segment. Once I finished with my camera, I hopped back in the paranormal pickup and started to pull out onto the main road. Because of the angle of the road, along with Igor's head blocking my vision, it was necessary for me to ask Igor if he saw anything coming. When Igor didn't reply, I assumed it was because nothing was coming. I pulled the paranormal pickup onto the road and looked over at Igor, whose head now tilted forward. I realized he was asleep. I checked the rearview mirror on Igor's side to make sure we hadn't pulled out in front of another vehicle. All I could see was the partial grille of a Mack logging truck coming fast. Instinctively, I pulled the wheel of the paranormal pickup to the left as hard as I could without rolling the pickup. As I did, a fully loaded logging truck screamed by, its horn bellowing and covered in a cloud of stinking black smoke from the tires it had locked up, trying not to hit us. It didn't take much to realize that Igor and I nearly died in that brief instant when I asked him if he saw anything coming. I thank God for saving us and looked at Igor, awakened by the foul smell of burning tires. I didn't want to alarm Igor about his quite recent near-death experience, so we drove on to Colville, surrounded for the first few miles by the smell of burning rubber that seemed to permeate through my paranormal pickup. It was then that a series of text messages began appearing on my phone, signaling first off that we had reached civilization. From the context of the texts, it was also apparent there was some concern in the Eastern Washington Bigfoot community and with my wife as to our whereabouts, as a number of undelivered texts began to roll in. Once I had assured everyone that we were fine and on our way to the house of Kelly Rainbow Butterfly and her husband Christian, I developed an even greater appreciation for the fact that we were not run over in the paranormal pickup from behind by a Mack logging truck. Now, if it were not for a set of bizarre circumstances and Melba Ketchum, this would be the end of the story. However, thanks to the rules of the park where we were camping, we had to take our trash out with us, which meant it stayed in the pack of my paranormal pickup for the drive back to Seattle. When I reached Seattle, the first thing I did was to unload the trash from the back of the pickup when I got home. But is that where the story ends? Hardly, because 2 days later, just a few minutes before trash pickup, I was laying in bed in the wee hours of the morning. I was thinking about the blood, where it came from, and most importantly, what happened to it. I went over the discovery and the cleanup. That was it, I thought. I had cleaned up the blood with paper towels. I realized I brought those blood-covered paper towels back with me, and they were sitting in my trash. Horrified, I realized it was Monday, trash day. I sprang out of bed, dressed, and made it to the garbage bins. Sure enough, they were full. With a little picking and sorting, I was able to find the bag of trash. If I could find that paper towel, I could find out whose blood ended up on the floor of my tent. I have collected these too, but as I started to put stuff away, that's it. This is it. So I'm going to keep this separate. I'm going to hang on to these also. I think these are just some kind of mold, whatever. But this is the blood. This is what I mopped up. And as you can see, there's a lot of it. So this is actually what I mopped up. So we need to save this and put it into a bag and put it in the fridge. Having successfully saved the paper towel I used to clean the blood from the floor of my tent, I consulted the only DNA expert I know, Dr. Melba Ketchum. After Dr. Ketchum explained her desire to have nothing to do with any Bigfoot research project, I explained to her there was no evidence the blood on the paper towel was from a Bigfoot. We just needed to find out who or what the blood belonged to. She told me to take the towel and put it in a sealed plastic bag, then put that sealed plastic bag and its contents into the freezer. I did exactly what she told me to do. In order to make sure my wife didn't throw it away, I put the blood sample into the rear of the freezer where she wouldn't find it. 3 months later, when I was starting to do preliminary work on this documentary, I went to the freezer only to discover the freezer bag and its contents were gone. And although she could never confirm it 100%, she told me she did seem to recall throwing away a baggie with what looked like trash in it. And so I was stuck. I had what was the most bizarre occurrence in the arena of Bigfoot hunting, and I had no evidence. It seemed like the end of the road for the documentary, until I remembered something. I hadn't cleaned the blood from the floor of the tent that thoroughly, as I was planning to clean the tent when I returned. In fact, not only had I not cleaned the floor of the tent, we had actually taken a trip to Yellowstone in August. I had covered the floor then with a tarp to hide the scant evidence of the blood stain left since my rather haphazard cleanup. I just wondered if there were traces of the mysterious blood and if they would be there and be enough to test it for DNA. I didn't even know how to collect it properly for analysis. So there was only one person who could answer that question. I had to go back to Dr. Melba Ketchum. Dr. Melba Ketchum, as you may recall, expressed a keen interest in not being involved in any Bigfoot research the first time we talked. She was even more adamant now that she realized what she had told me didn't work. What was worse, her suspicions were aroused because she had already helped me with the paper towel. When I explained to her what I think happened, Dr. Ketchum stayed on the line. When I was finally convinced Dr. Ketchum wouldn't hang up the phone, I asked her what I needed to do in order to submit the samples for DNA analysis. She then told me how to collect the samples. In order for me to collect the samples on a particularly rainy day in Seattle, it was necessary for me to set up the tent in a parking garage and obtain my samples while strictly following Dr. Ketchum's instructions. All right, everybody, here's the big moment. Now, I have consulted extensively with Dr. Melba Ketchum. She has explained to me exactly how to extract the blood from this tent for DNA testing. The important thing is that I want to do on this camera is to show the chain of custody so that all of my process, all of my procedures are documented. As you can see, all of my packages here are unopened. I'm just doing everything exactly as Dr. Ketchum told me to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start sterilizing things. But I want you to understand that the important thing here is, even though it may not look great, is that this camera has to stay on. Because I want you to see that there's through the entire chain of custody that nothing has been fudged or anything else, that everything has been kept according to Dr. Ketchum's strict instructions, because otherwise she killed me. There were going to be quite a few obstacles to collecting the DNA samples created by setting up the tent in an underground parking garage. The first obstacle to collecting a DNA sample was that I had never done it before. Second, I had to use the tailgate of my paranormal pickup as a workbench in order to allow access to the materials I was going to need. The fact that I had just purchased all the materials I needed, along with a lot of groceries that were still in the back of the pickup, limited the room I had available to me. The humidity in the garage was at least 90%. That, coupled with the thick sweat bottoms I was wearing, created a very hot and uncomfortable environment. Due to the low lighting, it was necessary to bring a studio light and power it off my car's cigarette lighter. Not touching. I think I'm going to be able to get at least three good swabs. All right, so the last thing, these I will rest these are just chopsticks, but I'm going to rest the Q-tip when it's in its final stage. I'm going to rest on the chopstick. Okay, so everything is now open. Nothing has been touched. So now I'm going to open my gloves. Once I had everything laid out, it was time to start the process of opening the testing materials I was instructed to use by Dr. Ketchum. Opening the gloves presented more of a challenge than I first imagined. I was soon grateful I purchased a packet of 2 because it was necessary to use one of the sterile gloves to open the other glove without contaminating it. I want to be very careful not to touch anything. So the next thing that I need to do is I need to set up my operation for... What I needed to do next, according to Dr. Ketchum's instructions, was to create a bed on which to place swabs containing the blood samples, which would later be used for DNA testing. As you can see, nothing was as easy as I thought it would be. At one point, I even thought about throwing in the towel. Getting the lids off the distilled water and bleach created another problem because if I touched them, I would be contaminating my gloves. The Q-tips are going to be resting on this. So in order to not contaminate, I'm dipping it all the way in. And as you can see, the entire thing is now covered with bleach. And that will be my resting spot. Not my final resting spot, hopefully. Okay, so let me explain the process. So we're going to get the Q-tip, and then we're going to move into the tent. So in order to do that, I'm going to have to bring the camera, and it's going to be a little bit awkward to do all this stuff. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to dip 3 Q-tips, and we'll see what kind of samples we can get. So according to Dr. Ketchum, she said about half. Well, I just quickly dipped it in because I really cannot see. That's about half. Once I had a handle on things, so to speak, I was ready for the next step. And now we're going to get the DNA. Okay. 3 Q-tips. And now, let's go for our first swab. I cannot begin to stress the difficulty of holding my camera in one hand, navigating into the tent, kneeling on concrete, and scrubbing an old bloodstain from the floor of the tent. Don't be alarmed, that isn't the sound of an evil Sith Lord. The heavy sound of my breathing highlights the state of confusion and exhaustion I'm already in after an hour of filming and setting up in the 90-degree heat. Once I obtained the first sample successfully, I placed it on the alcohol-soaked chopstick in order to keep the swab side away from the contaminants on the towel. I was ready to get my second sample. It was easy to see what was left of the original pool of blood was concentrated around the outer edge of the original deposit. There appeared to be enough material to cover a major portion of the swab, so all I had to do was to keep the sample from becoming contaminated. Once I had my second sample successfully propped up and free of contamination, I went for my third sample. Once my third sample was successfully obtained, I decided to go for one more sample, trying to get as much testing material as possible from the areas I hadn't yet covered on the floor of the tent. Okay, so now I have my samples, and the trick is I need to get them upstairs. So let's do that. The last step in the DNA collection process, according to DNA expert Dr. Melba Ketchum, was to put the DNA samples into envelopes and then seal them until the time they are ready to be tested. I used a separate envelope for each swab. In order to be able to eliminate my DNA from contaminating the sample, I submitted a swab from the inside of my cheek. What will the results be if the blood samples turn out to be human? Which human? Me, Igor Burtsev, or John? If the results are human and not from me, that means John and Igor will have to submit DNA samples so we can eliminate them as well. If the results are not from Igor and John or me, then from which human did the blood come? How did a human get into the tent without being noticed? If the results are not human, then what animal is it? Which animal has the ability and understanding of a zipper to be able to get in, bleed, and leave silently while zipping up the tent? One last thing to consider, according to Dr. Melba Ketchum's findings. If the DNA is from a Bigfoot, it's going to come back as human DNA. So we must rely on science to shed further light on the blood mystery. We will need to submit our blood samples to labs for a species identification test, according to Dr. Ketchum. We will also need to return to the scene of the Bigfoot activity in the eastern Washington Cascades. We need to further investigate the areas John explained were hotspots of Bigfoot activity. We need to see if the UFO activity continues. Finally, we need to see if we can get a new deposit of blood to investigate and compare to the samples we have submitted. Now that the samples have been obtained, documented, and stored, there is still the question of funding for the DNA testing. as well as the DNA testing itself. We left a lot of mysteries unsolved in the mountains of eastern Washington. In order to solve those mysteries, we're going to need even more help from Dr. Ketchum.